delivering excellence across business sectors. Building a future-ready nation. Our today has a strong foundation with community at its core. Our today is dedicated to the communities we serve. Is always about more than just today. Our today is a continuous journey for a better tomorrow. Tata, leadership with trust.
सर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। सर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता।
अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान।
अपनों को खुशियां दिलाना आसान नहीं बनाते तो आगे कैसे बढ़ते। इसीलिए हम जो भी करते हैं उसे बेहतर बनाते आ रहे हैं, बनाते रहेंगे। बजाज फिनसर्व, थिंक इट डन।
आने वाले कल की दस्तक हमें सुनाई देती है, नई मंजिल है जिस ओर हमें वो दिशा दिखाई देती है। नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए जोश से निकल पड़े हम, आने वाला कल होगा हमारा। नए इंडिया का नया जोश,
और नए इंडिया के सफर में टेक्नोलॉजी की शक्ति लेकर आपका भागीदार रहेगा। रिलायंस, नए इंडिया का नया जोश। Welcome to the world of Tata Steel, a flagship company of the global business conglomerate, the Tata Group. Tata Steel is one of the world's most geographically diversified steel producers, with operations and commercial presence across the world. The story began with the dream of one man, Jamsetji Nusserwanji Tata, a pioneer, a visionary, a man ahead of his times. He had his heart set on building a steel plant in India that could compare with the best globally. His dream was brought to fruition by his son, Dorabji Tata, and thus was born Tata Iron and Steel in Jamshedpur in 1907. At the turn of the 21st century, fueled by its global aspirations, Tata Steel expanded its footprint to Southeast Asia, in Singapore and Thailand. Acquisition of Chorus of Europe in 2007 placed it amongst the top global steel companies in the world. In 2015, Tata Steel set up at Kalinganagar, Odisha, in India. The Phase 2 expansion of Kalinganagar steel plant from 3 million TPA to 8 million TPA is currently underway. The company is all set to pursue domestic growth with its acquisition of Bhushan Steel Limited and the steel business of Bhushan Martin. This forms part of the overall strategy to increase its India footprint, build capacity in long products, and enrich the product portfolio. Besides steel manufacturing facilities, the company has mining assets in the state of Jharkhand and Odisha in India. Tata Steel has evolved into a leading steel manufacturer, catering to diverse market segments. In its trend-setting journey, spanning more than a century, Tata Steel has contributed immensely towards the well-being of the planet and people. Guided by its vision to be the global steel industry benchmark for value creation and corporate citizenship, Tata Steel is poised to lead the future.
सुरक्षा हर पिच पर ताकत लंबी बार खेलने की परफेक्ट क्वालिटी टेस्ट मैच से पहले ये सारे चेक्स बहुत जरूरी होते हैं ठीक वैसे जैसे घर की छत चूज करते हैं बस ले आइए GSW कलर ऑन प्लस की जो देते हैं आपके घर को मजबूती और सुरक्षा GSW कलर ऑन प्लस सुंदरता सालों साल
GSW न्यू स्टील TMT सरिया बेस्ट है सरिया दिखता है ये देखिए बेस्ट क्वालिटी
दिखता नहीं तो कुछ भी लगाओगे क्या ये
GSW न्यू स्टील TMT बार प्योर स्टील मजबूत घर ये दीवारें जानती हैं हर शुरुआत का पता एक नई सोच के साथ अपने सपने की सुबह
जब उम्मीद मिलाए हिम्मत से हाथ हर सपने को मिले मजबूती का साथ
आओ बनाए हर सपने को मजबूत GSW सीमेंट के साथ GSW सीमेंट द लीडर्स चॉइस कभी हिंदुस्तान के रंगों के बारे में सोचा है
लाल पीला हरा नीला। तो चलो मिलकर इस रंगीन चादर को फिर से सिलते हैं। जो तेरा वो मेरा और जो मेरा वो सबका। इसीलिए पहली बार GSW पेंट्स लाए हैं 1808 शेड्स एक ही प्राइस पर। GSW पेंट्स, think beautiful.
In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Today, we are $100 million global enterprise. Our today has been built on enduring values. Is about delivering excellence across business sectors. Building a future-ready nation. Our today has a strong foundation with community at its core. Today is dedicated to the communities we serve. Is always about more than just a day. Our today is a continuous journey for a better tomorrow. Tata, leadership with trust.
सर, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। साहब, अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता। अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान हो ही नहीं सकता।
अपनों को खुश रखना इससे आसान।
अपनों को खुशियां दिलाना आसान नहीं बनाते तो आगे कैसे बढ़ते। इसीलिए हम जो भी करते हैं उसे बेहतर बनाते आ रहे हैं, बनाते रहेंगे। बजाज फिनसर्व, think it, done.
आने वाले कल की दस्तक हमें सुनाई देती है। दिशा दिखाई देती है। नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए जोश से निकल पड़े हम, आने वाला कल होगा हमारा। नए इंडिया का नया जोश,
और नए इंडिया के सफर में टेक्नोलॉजी की शक्ति लेकर आपका भागीदार रहेगा रिलायंस। नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
Welcome to the world of Tata Steel, a flagship company of the global business conglomerate, the Tata Group. Tata Steel is one of the world's most geographically diversified steel producers, with operations and commercial presence across the world. The story began with the dream of one man, Jamsetji Narsarwalji Tata, a pioneer, a visionary, a man ahead of his times. He had his heart set on building a steel plant in India that could compare with the best globally. His dream was brought to fruition by his son, Dorabji Tata, and thus was born Tata Iron and Steel in Jamshedpur in 1907. At the turn of the 21st century, fueled by its global aspirations, Tata Steel expanded its footprint to Southeast Asia, in Singapore and Thailand. Acquisition of Chorus of Europe in 2007 placed it amongst the top global steel companies in the world. In 2015, Tata Steel set up a state-of-the-art integrated steel plant at Kalinganagar, Odisha, in India. The Phase 2 expansion of Kalinganagar steel plant from 3 million TPA to 8 million TPA is currently underway. The company is all set to pursue domestic growth with its acquisition of Bhushan Steel Limited and the steel business of Bhushan Martin. This forms part of the overall strategy to increase its India footprint, build capacity in long products, and enrich the product portfolio. Besides steel manufacturing facilities, the company has mining assets in the state of Jharkhand and Odisha in India. Tata Steel has evolved into a leading steel manufacturer, catering to diverse market sectors. In its trend-setting journey, spanning more than a century, Tata Steel has contributed immensely towards the well-being of the planet and people, guided by its vision to be the global steel industry benchmark for value creation and corporate citizenship. Tata Steel is poised to lead the future.
सुरक्षा हर पिच पर ताकत लंबी पर खेलने परफेक्ट क्वालिटी टेस्ट मैच से पहले ये सारे चेक्स बहुत जरूरी है, ठीक वैसे जैसे घर की छत चूज करते समय। बस ले आइए GSW कलर ऑन प्लस की छत, जो दे आपके घर को मजबूती और सुरक्षा। GSW कलर ऑन प्लस, सुंदर छत सालों साल।
GSW न्यू स्टील TMT सरिया बेस्ट है। ये देखिए बेस्ट क्वालिटी।
दिखता नहीं तो कुछ भी लगाओगे क्या? ये GSW न्यू स्टील TMT बार प्योर स्टील मजबूत घर।
ये दीवारें जानती हैं हर शुरुआत का पता। एक नई सोच के साथ अपने सपने की सुबह।
जब उम्मीद मिलाए हिम्मत से हाथ, हर सपने को मिले मजबूती का साथ।
आओ बनाए हर सपने को मजबूत GSW सीमेंट के साथ। GSW सीमेंट, द लीडर्स चॉइस।
कभी हिंदुस्तान के रंगों के बारे में सोचा है? लाल, पीला, हरा, नीला। तो चलो मिलकर इस रंगीन चादर को फिर से सिलते हैं, जो तेरा वो मेरा और जो मेरा वो सबका। इसीलिए पहली बार GSW पेंट्स लाए हैं 1808 शेड्स एक ही प्राइस पर। GSW पेंट्स, think beautiful.
In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Today, we are $100 million global enterprise. Our today has been built on enduring values.
So we will start, sir, once our Shepa comes on camera. So we are just trying to.
We can give him green signal and.
Yeah. So we are just checking with his office. So.
Okay. Okay. G-20 and G-7.
So welcome, Marco, Pranavya.
Yes, Mr. Marco Felisati is here as well. Welcome to the program. Wonderful to be sharing the panel with you. I'm Rajiv Bhatia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bhatia. Good morning to everybody. Bonjour, Nicolas. Hello, Stormy. Very nice to meet you, both of you.
उसको बोला ना मेरे को पहला बोलने के लिए।
जी सर।
Welcome, Sir Shri Suresh Prabhu. Great to have you on this program, sir.
Can I speak?
नमस्कार, मैं शुरू करवाता हूं सर. Pranab, you want to start now?
Sir, we are all set to start, sir. Please go ahead.
Rajiv
Thank you very much. Ji, namaskar, sir.
Rajiv, can I speak first? I have to go to Parliament.
Zarur, sir. There is absolutely no difficulty. So I'll just say one line to welcome.
Yeah, please. After that, of course.
If you have about 4 or 5 minutes, I can speak, but otherwise I can yield it to you, sir.
No, please go ahead, then I can speak, and then I have to go to Parliament.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Welcome to the CII Partnership Summit 2020. My name is Rajiv Bhatia. I'm a former ambassador, and I work with a prestigious think tank, Gateway House. We are here for the session 4, which is to discuss role of G20 in building strong global partnership for reviving world economy. Shri Suresh Prabhu, India's G20 and G7 Sherpa, Monsieur Nicolas Pino, OECD Sherpa to the G20 and G7, Dr. Stormy Anika Mildner, Head of Department of External Economic Policy, Federation of German Industries, Ibu Erlinda Imbang Jaya, Special Advisor to the Minister of Trade and International Relations, Ministry of Trade in the Republic of Indonesia, and Mr. Marco Felisati, B20 Sherpa for Italy, and all dear friends who have joined this program today, a distinguished assembly of business leaders, thinkers, social activists, and everybody who's interested in G20 and its perspective on the world today. Greetings to all of you. I would like to make some opening remarks before inviting our former minister, Shri Suresh Prabhu, to deliver his opening remarks to all of you, and thereafter we shall go one by one to the panelists and a discussion will follow thereafter. We fully take note of the fact that Shri Suresh Prabhu, who is the serving member of the parliament, is required to go back as soon as possible, and he has been gracious enough to allow me just a few minutes to make remarks in order to set the context very clearly. I think it is important to do so because now this is the season of many discussions and meetings relating to G20. We are here at the prestigious Apex Business Chamber of India, CII, the Confederation of Indian Industry. And it's very important, I think, for our distinguished foreign audience and foreign panelists to appreciate the context in which this particular dialogue has been arranged. Let me just say a few points about the broad economic situation as it seems to us here. Then a little bit very briefly about India's perspective and CII's perspective. First, I would like to essentially say that we are seeing the world is in a mission mode to combat the unprecedented health crisis which has been created by COVID-19. And while doing so, it has to adopt a comprehensive strategic approach in order to be able to secure sustainable economic growth, create jobs, and also foster prosperity. Now, in this context, we have to take a very clear-eyed note of the fact that the IMF has projected the growth rate of minus 4.4% for the year 2020. That means essentially governments and our businesses have to work very hard to be working on more strong and forward-looking fiscal and monetary policies which could trigger a rebound in 2021. Now, in this context, we all, I think, would share the view that G20 plays a tremendous role as a coordinated global growth platform. It is essentially now under the Italian presidency, guided by the magazine, which is a tripod of people, planet, and prosperity. So the expectations are there. Amidst, I must recognize, some skepticism also, because critics and cynics, we know what they say about an institution such as G20 as well. Now, in this context, we clearly see that very strong endeavors are needed to encourage greater cross-border trade. This requires the removal of all, or most tariff and non-tariff barriers. Certainly, it also requires the removal of various, export restrictions which get imposed from time to time. Clearly, a key element in the future path is more trade among nations. We also have to very much aim at G20 helping us in the more effective implementation of the 2030 agenda, because only then the world can expect to secure sustainable development in an integrated manner. Finally, there is this very important need for creating new jobs in social protection, giving a special attention to constituencies of women and youth. And essentially, that means a very special focus has to be placed on multi-skilling and reskilling of the workforce, because the world today has changed considerably, and so has the workplace as well. Now, in that context, spelling out the Indian perspective, which of course will be done by Shri Suresh Prabhu, it is my duty to point out or to recall that Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, he presented a new global index for development at the last summit, and he spelled out the 4 key elements of this index. One, that there is a need for a vast talent of pool. Secondly, we have to ensure that technology reaches all segments of the society. Third, the imperative need for transparency in the systems of governance. And fourth, that the world, not just India, the world should approach the Mother Earth with a spirit of trusteeship. So that case for environment-friendly development was presented in a very emphatic manner by the Prime Minister of India. So moving from here, we are very much hoping that the flagship initiative of Atmanirbhar Bharat will create a situation where India would take part in the global value chains in a bigger manner by becoming even more competitive than before. So it is in this context, my final point relates to the role of CII, having worked with them from time to time and rather closely. I know that CII is a proud and proactive member of the coalition of Indian G20 engagement groups. It is engaged in generating meaningful inputs for the Indian presidency in 2023 by way of policy advocacy, workshops, interactions, and e-conferences. CII's key objective is to create a significant difference to entrepreneurs and business people at the grassroots level, thus providing impetus to economic growth in coming years. Dear panelists, your views, therefore, today are likely to reach India Inc. and beyond through the breadth and length of India, and also, since this is an international audience, it will be reaching to a lot of other countries as well. So thank you very much for your attention. I would like now straight away invite Shri Suresh Prabhu to address you. But before that, please allow me 1 minute to very briefly introduce him because he is. It's an honor to have him here with us today. He is a very well-known political leader. He's India's Sherpa to the G7 and G20, as you know. He is a former Minister of Railways, Minister of Commerce and Industry, and Civil Aviation. He was there in the first cabinet of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. By profession, he is a chartered accountant by training and by profession. He is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Since 1996, Prabhu has been repeatedly elected as a member of parliament from Rajapur Lok Sabha constituency in Maharashtra. He currently represents Andhra Pradesh in the Rajya Sabha. He has truly contributed a great deal to India's economic policy, to its framing, to its implementation, and to its projection. So it's a great honor once again to invite you, Mr. Prabhu, to address us now. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bhatia. And it's really nice to see my colleagues and friends in the G20 family who are present here and will be addressing this important meeting very soon. This is the program which is organized by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, of which I was a minister till last year, as well as by the Confederation of Indian Industry, which is the leading body of representing the India's industry. And this is an event which we organize every year called Partnership Summit. And this is very appropriate that in this Partnership Summit, we are involved G20 and B20. Because this is a very shining example of how partnership should be, is evidenced by the G20 working together to lead on so many issues which the world is confronting with. The theme of this conference is life, livelihoods, and growth. I think I'm very glad to note that G20 has already taken note of all these three important concerns, as is reflected into the last leadership summit, which took place in Riyadh, though virtually. And that summit communique clearly talks about all these three issues in a very clear manner. So I must congratulate my friends in Saudi Arabia for taking leadership role and conducting the G20 presidency in one of the most difficult and unprecedented times. And also congratulate my friends in Italy, who have just taken over from Saudi Arabia. And I'm sure they will do as good a job because they have talked about planet people. And they are really working on that to make it better. And planet and people are both equally important when we discuss about lives, livelihood, and growth. We cannot have growth by compromising with planet. And we cannot care for people and unless we provide them life and livelihood. We have to therefore work on health issues so that we can take care of lives. But we also must take care of economy. Without economic growth, there cannot be livelihoods. At the same time, while doing all this, if we have to care for people and their livelihood, we cannot do it unless we take care of planet. Because there is no livelihood without planet, and there is no people that can survive without planet being there. So therefore, integrating all these three is a very important issue. And I think we can clearly see in the next few months' time, the economic growth should come back. But when it comes back, it all depends upon what kind of world we want to build. Do you want to build a world which will be with the same problem that we have already had in the past, or we want to build a better world? Can we bring growth in such a way that will promote livelihoods but will not compromise with the existence of the people themselves. And to do that, we have a great opportunity. We together can work in a way that we can be economically interdependent as well as self-serving as humanity for making sure that we care for our higher objective of making environment as a basic purpose of our existence. And if we do that, there are possibilities of bringing growth through renewable energy. There's a possibility of bringing growth through climate-proof infrastructure growth. We can bring that by bringing in and caring for our oceans and therefore caring for fisheries. If you care for oceans, we are actually taking care of livelihoods. The fishermen, those who depend on oceans. If we take care of our mountains, we are taking care of tourism, the people who depend on that. So taking care of oceans, taking care of mountains, taking care of water, all of these ensure that we are taking care of planet, which is, I'm very glad to note that my friends in Italy are talking about it. But to do that, we are also ensuring that people will get jobs and the livelihoods will also be taken care of. So this is all possible if you work in a very integrated and also holistic manner. We work in a way that we bring together many concerns of people, but concerns of humanity, and we also take care of the future challenges that we are going to face in the world. And to do all this, I think we can work in a very focused manner, but by working together. G20 is a perfect forum to do that. G20 is the grouping of countries who are economically advanced but socially conscious. This is a group of people who have already developed technology by demonstrating that there is so much of intellectual capital available. But this is a grouping which also demonstrated that they have heart, because as is shown in the compassion that was displayed during the time the COVID, in which we took leadership to provide vaccine and create new and better healthy world. So I think this grouping is a most important grouping. G20 can focus on that. And when Italy hands over the presidency to our friend Indonesia, and when Indonesia hands it over to India, I think we'll have to work in tandem with, as I said, all three I's, Italy, Indonesia, and India, to care for the planet in a very significant way, care for economy to bring back growth, but that growth should be sustainable and should not be compromised in a way that will damage our basic cause of existence, purpose of existence. And therefore, we have to work on that in a very effective manner. I'm very happy to note that we already have put in place a very good objective in terms of sustainable development goals. These are the goals which can ensure that adhering to the goals, we have a very sustainable but very steady growth in the world to come. I also welcome that the United States has appointed a very distinguished leader, Secretary John Kerry, as a special envoy to deal with climate change. That shows that we can work in this world that we want the growth to come in a very forward-looking and democratic way. In a multilateral world, we want to build the world which will have a voice of all the people of the world can be reflected into that. So therefore, I really welcome this initiative. CII is a leading institution dealing with economy in India, in industry in India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as a leader of India, has been embarking upon a very ambitious target for reducing the emissions by increasing the renewable energy, by starting International Solar Alliance, which can ensure that growth can come in through development of solar power, jobs can be created by development of solar power, but at the same time will reduce the emission. This kind of initiatives are really needed, and therefore I welcome it. Ambassador Bhatia mentioned about my role even in G7, and I was very happy to note that during the presidency of France last year, in the G7, when it took place in Biarritz, there was a very good initiative on oceans. And I think that's a very, very important initiative because oceans are the most important final arbiter of saving humanity. They are the carbon sinks, but they have huge biodiversity in terms of marine biodiversity. We should maintain all that. And again, the oceans themselves have the ability to create jobs, to create new source of energy. Hydrates can be creating the new source of energy. And to do all this, we really need to work together. So I really welcome this initiative. I thank you. I have to go to the parliament because I am on the joint committee of discussing with a very important issue that is facing the world today, that is data privacy, and that is for how to ensure that human beings' privacy is also protected. So we really thank you once again. We are a very distinguished diplomat who has served in many capacities for India in various different parts of the world. Ambassador Bhatia is chairing it. So I'm very happy that we'll really take it forward. I'm very happy to note my friend, the OECD, Sherpa, also here. I'm very happy to note that head of Department of Policy in Germany, she's also here. In fact, just now I spoke to your Secretary for Environment only about a few minutes ago. And I was talking to him, who is Mr. Flagship, who was there with me. I just talked to him, who is a German State Secretary for Environment. I just spoke to him only a few minutes ago. I'm very happy to note that we also have in this program my B20 Sherpa, Marco Felasti from Italy also here. So I wish all of them really well, and I hope that we can work together. I can see even, I think, from Indonesia, my Mr. Ailinda, she's also here. And as I said, Indonesia is a great friend. So when I was announced in the G20 meeting that we'll be requesting Indonesia to host it before us, I was saying that we are going to do it because Indonesia is such a good friend of India that we like to follow Indonesia. And in Indonesia, there is India, but also Asia. So you represent the whole continent. So really look forward to working with all of you. All the best to you. All the best to even Marco. Now I can see him in the screen. All the best to you. And Mr. Pino will meet again very soon to take forward our OECD agenda. And thank you, Tommy Milda, for being Germany is really a leader into all these issues together. They have displayed how renewable energy can be brought in, and they are the first one who started feed-in tariff many years ago. They are the ones who helped in bringing sustainable world. So I really welcome all of this. And Ambassador Bhatia, you are the most able person to moderate it. I take your leave and thank you very much. God bless you all. And many best wishes for the Christmas, many wishes for the New Year, best wishes for the holidays. I hope my friends in Europe will get over the corona very soon. I hope all of you take care of your own lives while we take care of lives of all other people in the world. Thank you very much. God bless you all. I think you are muted. Mr. Bhatt.
Thank you very much for your very inspiring words, mixed with a lot of personal messages for all of us. But I think your central point came through loud and clear, your faith and conviction in sustainable development, and the way you spoke about the importance of water, mountains, oceans, and how they can actually also not merely help us to move towards growth, but also prosperity. That was very, very important. All the panelists and their organizations and their governments. That shows very clearly the breadth of your vision. I also wish to highlight the way the former minister put across another central idea in the message, which is that, and I do this while giving a nod to our distinguished colleague from Germany, because the minister spoke about how the countries carrying 3 I's in their names could work in tandem in future. They will be doing so naturally on the achievements of the previous presidencies, but it is really coincidental but very important, that three very friendly countries, Italy, Indonesia, and India, will have rare opportunity to show the leadership and give this leadership to this great institution in the next 3 years. So with these words, thank you very much, Mr. We appreciate very much the time, and since you have calling of the public duty, we cannot, at any stage when you feel you have to go, you naturally use your discretion. Dear friends, now I will move quickly to the panelists, and as I invite them, I'm going to briefly introduce them. Each panelist will speak, as we have already agreed, for about 8 to 10 minutes. And once the cycle is completed, then we will have a discussion so that everybody feels engaged. It's a great pleasure to introduce Pino, OECD Sherpa to the G20, and he also handles other multilateral fora, namely APEC and so on. He provides strategic advice to the Secretary General on G20, G7, APEC, and other global governance issues, working closely with the Chief of Staff and the G20 Finance Deputy. And he anticipates emerging global policy challenges, helping the organization to respond with cutting-edge policy analysis and outputs relevant to the global discussion. I think he would agree that in the G20 evolution, OECD has played a very significant and perhaps seminal role. And this is the importance of G20 that we all appreciate in the developing world, that OECD, in addition to some of the other very well-known institutions, World Bank, the IMF, etc., have been so closely integrated with the work of G20. And this is the reason why, sitting here in India, we are fully aware of the importance of G20 as the premier forum or the premier institution for international dialogue, policy action, and indeed governance. So at this point, may I request Mr. Pino to please take the floor and address us.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks a lot for the invitation. Thanks to CI. It's really an honor to be there, and indeed, as you said, I hope the OECD as a sort of strategic partner of the G20 was somehow useful over the last decade in informing the discussion within the G20, in particular in its attempt to solve global issues. And I'm glad to see familiar faces on the screen, with whom we worked very closely in 2017 during the German presidency, and we look forward to working with Marco during the Italian presidency, obviously, and to keep on working with India and with the Honorable Suresh Prabhu going forward, not to forget Indonesia, of course, in 2022. So it's a real pleasure to be there. Let me start maybe with providing some pointers on the economic situation, since the OECD has just released its OECD interim economic assessment that actually points to forecasts that are very close to the one by the IMF that you mentioned in your introduction, Chair. We are slightly more optimistic than the IMF. We expect a fall of 4.2% this year, but essentially that we are in the same range. It's slightly better than what we had forecast in September, which was a fall of 4.5%. We are obviously factoring the impact of the vaccine deployment, which is faster than what we had initially expected. But what matters really is that almost all G20 countries, developed and developing countries alike, except China, will suffer an extremely deep recession in 2020. So in China, in fact, we will have a growth of 1.2% this year, while the US will see a decline of around 3.7%. We expect a fall of GDP of 7.5% in the euro area and around 10% in India. So we can see very wide differences. And in fact, we have looked carefully at the drivers of those differences across economic performance. And we've done some, in particular, some statistical, some econometric work that shows that the differences in the stringency of containment measures, in particular, the lockdown, the confinement, explain up to 60% of cross-country differences in GDP performance over the recent period. Obviously, this is something that we expected, but it's always good to put some statistical evidence on this kind of heterogeneity in terms of GDP performances. This crisis is obviously having a major impact on labor markets. As we know, we've seen a fall in the number of people working that was 14 times the total decline seen during the global financial crisis. So it shows really the unprecedented impact of the COVID crisis. But most worryingly, maybe, is when we look at investment trends in the corporate sector, and I'm sure that Stormy and Marco will elaborate on that. What we see is that we have actually entered into a period, especially with this second wave, into a period of stop and go. We are in a stop and go mode, and this is very damaging for over the medium to long term, because this second wave has actually created a lot of uncertainty. Uncertainty has become pervasive. This is the case for households, which are starting to factor in the impact of unemployment in their consumption behavior, and this is quite different from what we have seen in the first wave. But most importantly for corporation, they had actually used a lot of cash in the first wave of the crisis. They had burned, so to speak, a lot of cash, a lot of working capital. They took on a lot of debt in order to face this sort of liquidity crunch. And now they are really facing some real solvency issue. And what we fear for next year is really a sort of tsunami of corporate bankruptcies. And I would welcome very much the views of our colleagues on this panel who are from the corporate sector. That's something that will probably have a major impact on investment. Already what we had seen in the third quarter of this year was a strong rebound of growth, but that was mostly driven by consumption and in a very limited manner by investment. So it shows that in fact corporations, many of them have stopped investing. One reason for that is, as I said, it's the lack of cash, but also strong uncertainties on the trade front. Trade, in fact, is not really restarting, and the crisis has stricken an already very stressed international trade landscape. Before the crisis already, you had a lot of trade tensions, a rise in protectionist measures, as we documented with UNCTAD and WTO in our regular report to the G20 on the trade and investment protectionist measure. We had already at the end of 2019, before the crisis, a strong slowdown, a dramatic slowdown of the growth in international trade, and obviously this crisis now is making this even more problematic. And WTO is expecting a 9% drop in the volume of world merchandise trade this year. So this is another reason for companies, for corporations to sit back, wait, and not to invest. And the problem with this lack of investment, it's going to have long-term consequences. It has an impact on the capital accumulation, on research and development, on innovation, and down the line, it will have a strong impact on potential growth and on the total factor productivity. And this will really reduce the potential growth of the global economy over the medium to long term. There is another factor which we are watching very carefully. This is the impact on the financial sector. I must say the financial sector has been very resilient in the first wave of the crisis, also because of the action of central banks and all the liquidities that were dumped up in the system. But the question now is to what extent banks will resist to precisely this possible tsunami of corporate bankruptcies next year if it were to materialize. We have seen already a rise in non-performing loans in the balance sheet of banks. Remain contained, but the question is really whether the banks will have sufficient buffer to weather a strong rise in non-performing loans next year, something that can be really expected. One other dimension of this crisis, as was also mentioned by Suresh Prabhu, is the impact on developing countries. We've seen obviously a strong rise in poverty. The World Bank is expected a rise of the number of people in poverty of around 150 million over the coming year. We have seen strong capital outflows from developing countries, emerging least developed and emerging ones. We've seen also some debt defaults materializing. So this is very worrying. This is especially worrying for the financing of SDGs. We had already before the crisis a strong gap in terms of SDG financing, estimated at around $2.5 trillion annually. So now we have with this crisis a sort of a scissor effect. On the one hand, we have a sort of estimated gap of $1 trillion in COVID-19 emergency and response spending, so more spending on the one hand. And on the other hand, we are seeing external private financing is going down. We expect a drop of around $700 billion this year. So overall, we can expect this SDG financing gap to increase by around $1.7 trillion next year. So it's absolutely huge. So that's for the economic situation. And obviously, I don't have the time to elaborate, but this crisis is also having a profound structural impact on our economies and society, digitalization, inequalities. In fact, this crisis is really operating as a sort of photographic developer. It's bringing into the spotlight deep underlying trends like digitalization that were there before, but it is also magnifying some of them. I mentioned inequalities. And it's also bringing in the spotlight some interdependencies, like, for instance, this toxic nexus between pandemic, climate change, and the loss of biodiversity, which were not really on top of the policy agenda, but now really become absolutely critical, and that will have to be addressed. So what can be the G20 role in this context? Well, in fact, it is a paradox. We are witnessing a sort of paradox. This crisis started exactly at a time when we were witnessing, I would say, a sort of ebb of multilateralism. And multilateralism was really under a lot of stress, a lot of pushback, including from former champions of multilateralism. And this is precisely when this crisis started, a crisis which is really a crisis of globalization, which shows how interconnected our economies are. So in a way, this crisis can also be a wake-up call, a catalyst for change. It will make the case for more, not less international cooperation, more, not less multilateralism. And from this perspective, obviously, the G20 is very well placed to provide an answer to those various systemic challenges. I think already with the Saudi presidency, the G20 was in a position to provide a strong and powerful response. We had, first of all, a very strong fiscal response to the crisis of around 11 trillion US dollar. The G20 came up with this flagship initiative on the debt suspension initiative for developing countries, and I mentioned before how critical support to those countries is in the current juncture. But of course, the G20 needs to do even more going forward. On trade in particular, I mentioned the situation in the international trade, which is quite problematic. There, the G20 they really need to go back to the drawing board in terms of advancing the WTO reform. There is also, I think, a potential for the G20 to be more ambitious, precisely, for instance, putting in place this standstill that we've seen after the financial crisis in 2009, standstill on protectionist measures. The G20 could also be more ambitious on health. This is an area where really the G20 has not acted very strongly last year. Mostly hijacked, I would say, this agenda was mostly hijacked by the controversies around the role of WHO. The G20 can also provide a strong momentum on climate, in particular ahead of the COP26 and also on biodiversity with the COP15. And there it's good to see a sort of a nice alignment of the stars with UK in the G7, Italy presiding the G20, and both countries co-chairing the COP26. And of course, for developing countries, I think the G20 should go beyond the DSSI and really considering some outright debt relief for developing countries beyond the suspension of debt services. So these are a few pointers on what the G20 could do going forward. So there is still a lot of work to do for the G20. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Piyush. This was, to my mind, an excellent start of the presentation by a distinguished panel. You are very brilliant. You were very vivid in pinpointing how the pandemic has affected the global economy. You went step by step, comparing projections done by IMF and OECD, pointing out the impact on various compartments, where you went actually surpassing yourself in my pause when you start spelling out what G20 could really do, and the way you projected, the possibilities in the field of trade, in the field of climate change, and above all, for the developing countries. I think these are all very inspiring ideas, and they are essentially a response to critics who keep dismissing G20 as the talking shop. If this is a forum that is in charge of the welfare of the world, clearly it is also very much a thought shop, and we would like very much to see this in a far more positive light than critics and cynics. Finally, I think your point that this crisis caught the multilateral at its ebb, and therefore now it can be a catalyst today. That is a matter of very positive way to look at the situation today. Thank you very much. I will now move forward. and would like to take a minute to introduce the next panelist, Dr. Stormy Annika Milner, Head of Department of External Economic Policy, Federation of German Industries. In 2014, she became the head of the department at BDI, which is the Federation of German Industries, which is an exact counterpart body for CII. The two have been working together for a long time. Since then, since 2014, she spearheaded the BDI TTIP campaign. As Sherpa, she was responsible for the German Business 7 presidency in 2015 and the German Business 20 presidency in 2016-17. And in 2017-18, she represented the BDI together an initiative by the German Foreign Ministry, the Goethe Institute and the BDI, and she obviously has been involved in all these activities in a very sustained manner. One can also point out that her fields of interest include international trade and as well as commodity markets. I could go on, but I think you have got the general idea. Just have got the person from Germany, a country which did remarkable work during its presidency of G20. And I request Madame now you to take the floor and address us.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very, very much for this kind introduction and for having me today. It's really always a pleasure to cooperate with CII. As you mentioned, BDI is very similar to CII. We are partners in crime, so to say. We are partner institutions, and we have had a lot of opportunities to cooperate. Among those is our joint partnership, our joint membership in the Global Business Coalition, and it's really a pleasure being here today. And I also want to emphasize that I'm really, really impressed how early you all started with preparing for the G20 India presidency. And I always say you can't start early enough because the challenges are really, really great. And I find it very impressive what you have done so far. So what I would like to do, I would like to share a few of my observations about the big challenges we are currently facing. And the second thing I would like to do is draw a few lessons what that means for the G20, both institutionally, but also topic-wise. And I would like to reiterate many of the points the previous speakers have us alerted to. I very much agree that there is a lot to do and a lot of unfinished business, but also a lot of chances right now, because I believe that the change in leadership in the United States also opens a window of opportunity for a restart for global governance and multilateralism. So let me start with my observations, and I've divided these in 7 brief observations. My first observation is that we are facing a crisis of which we had in this way not seen before. At least not in my generation or in the generation before my generation, because it's a crisis at multiple fronts. It's not as in the beginning of the G20, when the G20 became a leaders G20, a crisis which was pretty much centered around financial markets, which then spilled over to the real economy, and which could be addressed by monetary policy and fiscal policy and financial regulatory reform. This is a crisis which we are currently facing in lots of policy fields. It's a health crisis, it's an economic crisis, it's a financial crisis, it's a debt crisis. And in a lot of countries, we are seeing very high unemployment rates, we see increasing income inequality because minorities are hit particularly hard. We are also, I fear that we also might see an increase in inequality between countries because many smaller developing countries are hit particularly hard, and investment, as we just heard, is also flowing out of these countries instead of going into these countries. And this is a crisis which cannot be addressed by one policy area or one stream of ministries in the G20, but we need an approach across different policy areas, but also across different governance levels, from the multilateral to the local. And that makes it really, really complex and very hard to deal with, so much harder than the last crisis. My second observation is, and that is something which we had seen for several years before the COVID crisis, is that we have seen a spreading nationalism, go-it-alone strategies, protectionism, and I would say that this has increased during the crisis. There is a tendency to think national first, and I have to and unfortunately admit that the EU also did do this, and even Germany, by very early on in the crisis, restricting exports of protective gear. First Germany did it, then the EU did it, and that was certainly something which did not help during the crisis. So this inside-oriented, domestic-oriented view, that is certainly exacerbated during the crisis. My third observation is something which I also saw before the crisis, and which has intensified during the crisis, and that is more state interventionism. We all need to do stimulus packages. We all need to support our industries. There's no question about this, but it already started before the crisis with industrial policies, with subsidies. And that is something which might be locked in because of the crisis, and which might be difficult to get out again when we exit the crisis. The fifth observation is that we already, before the crisis again, we saw, I would say, an unhealthy meddling of trade policy, industrial policy, and national security policy. We are throwing a lot into one basket, which might not really belong into one basket. We use trade policy for geopolitical aims. I very much hope that we're getting out of this with the new US administration, but it's something to definitely take into account when we talk about trade policy. My fifth observation is with regard to global supply chains. What we have noticed in the crisis is that diversification really is key, and time and efficiency is always very important, but it's not sufficient if we look at business activities and supply chains. We need to build in redundancies. We need to diversify. We need to also think about strategic reserves for some areas. It showed us that we are more vulnerable than we thought we are, and especially smaller and medium-sized enterprises which don't have the capacity to really analyze their value chains. There's a lot to do. The sixth observation is that we have a crisis of the multilateral system, with the WTO in its center in all three pillars: liberalization and rule setting, monitoring, but also dispute settlement. That is a huge crisis which gets us into the field of, or which undermines the rule of law internationally, which is very, very problematic for companies. But there's also a mistrust in globalization and multilateralism, and that brings me to my next observation, that in many countries, the support for globalization has eroded over a long time, and we really need a new narrative on globalization. And my last observation is that in the G20 cooperation, not just in the G20, really very much in all global governance fora, trust and understanding also among the leaders has eroded substantially over the last 4 years. And there have been new wounds opened, new gaps, which now needs to be closed. And that brings me to my second part, what we need to do with regard to global governance and the G20, and first with institutional issues. I think we need to have much more dialogue across the different streams in the G20. So digital and health and employment and climate, these are not isolated, but they are very much related. And we need to get out of the silo thinking and get the policymakers to talk to each other and develop a joint language, because a lot of times I don't see that yet. We need trust building exercises among the leaders. We need to be careful not to push everything into the leaders summit and then hope that they will solve it if they didn't have the opportunity to talk about these issues beforehand. I also believe that the engagement partners are a strength of the G20, which could be even strengthened by supporting the exchange between the engagement partners, but also between the G20 and the engagement partners. I also believe that, and that's why it's so important that the OECD is part of the G20 process, we need to fully integrate other organizations into the process, and last but not least, work on a joint narrative together what we want to achieve. Topical issues, we've heard them before, where there is a lot of unfinished business on trade, how we deal with unfair trade policies, subsidies, overcapacity, but also WTO reform. I would say on health, there is enormous unfinished business, not just with regard to vaccine distribution, but also for future pandemic preparedness. WHO reform, but also how we trade in pharmaceutical goods. Digital, I would say there's a lot of unfinished business with regard to data transfer and protection and privacy, but also artificial intelligence. There needs to be a lot done with regard to how we want to deal with this. And last but not least, on climate issues, CO2 pricing, circular economy, waste, and also oceans. I was so happy to hear that you mentioned oceans before. It's a really important topic. So I leave it with this, lots of unfinished business, but we will only be able to tackle them if we rebuild trust and understanding in the G20. And I always say, where there is a political will, there is also a way to tackle these issues. So thank you so much again for having me today.
Thank you very much, Madam. What a way to, reach conclusion, traveling with you on this journey, where there is a political way, where there's political will, there would be a way. I think you were very clear-cut in presenting the diagnosis, through your 7 observations. They are so fresh in everybody's mind that I would not need to again, especially in the interest of time. I think, the thoughts that are coming from you show that there is a great deal of convergence among many of us. The issue is that the problems have become more serious, and therefore the instrument discussing really also will need to scale up its game. I think this is a very clear message that is coming from you, and this is already presented also by the previous participants. Thank you very much for your valuable contribution. Now move quickly to Indonesia. This is Madam Erlinda Imbang Jaya, who is, as I said earlier, Special Advisor to the Minister of Trade. She naturally is from Indonesia. She has had her education in Indonesia and the US, and she is currently serving as a Special Advisor to the Minister. She earlier was Director General of National Export Development in the Ministry of Trade, and she's done a lot of work in the trade field and the related fields of economic policy. It is my to Madam to deliver.
Thank you. Can you hear my voice, yes. Ambassador? Yes. Thank you for giving me a floor, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia. Distinguished panelists and participants, good afternoon. A very good day to all of you. On behalf of the Minister of Trade of the Republic of Indonesia, it is my great honor, of course, to join the other panelists today. And I am delighted to add Indonesia's view on the important topics raised by this event. As you all may aware, Indonesia will hold the G20 presidency in 2022, exchanging its presidency term with India and join the G20 Troika with the Italian presidency next year. Therefore, to speak on the role of the G20 in building strong global partnership for reviving world economy is also quite relevant for Indonesia. Having said that, without further ado, I will start my session talking about this topic. We have witnessed a continuous slowdown in global trade in recent years, only to be aggravated by the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has caused an unprecedented impact on the global economy and trade, as mentioned by previous speakers. However, Indonesia prefers to be optimistic for further recovery, as the Indonesia economic growth is showing positive trend and expected to keep on this track for the coming years. Indonesia economic growth has passed the rock bottom minus 5.32% in second quarter and third quarter of 2020, rebounding to reach a positive trend of minus 3.49%. It is expected that in the fourth quarter, the trend will still be positive, even is that minus 0.6%. Two other indicators that also grew positively were the profit institution serving household consumption by 0.56% and the government consumption by 16.93%. However, imports are still slightly negative, minus 0.08%. The improvement also occurred on the supply side. The manufacturing industry and the agriculture sector experienced improvement with quarterly growth of 5.25% and 1.01% respectively. Likewise, the sector that had heavily effective negative in the second quarter, the accommodation and food and beverage jumped to 14.79% in first quarter. It recorded minus 20%. Although public production and purchasing power have not returned to the level before pandemic, the number of economic indicators have shown gradually improve as economic activities began. Ladies and gentlemen, tourism sector, as the most effective sector, of course, by the pandemic, has also begun to show improve compared with the previous quarter. Capital inflow has begun to increase after a significant decline in early 2020. Capital inflow has increased, our bond yield level has also decreased, and demand for our bonds is quite good. That means we can encourage bigger capital inflow for investment, be it in the form of the indirect investment portfolio or through the direct investment. I think overall, a positive trend of economic growth has been achieved with the government intervention policy in the form of COVID-19 handling and national economic recovery. Next year, our budget state in 2021 is particularly designed for the COVID-19 handling program and especially for the vaccination. Despite all the positive signs of our economic growth, however, we are fully aware of the risks and challenges ahead. The economy may remain sluggish, and it can be assumed there will be a full power recovery because the pandemic will remain an important factor that will delay recovery in domestic consumption, investment, and global economy. In line with the Indonesia National Medium-Term Development Plan, Indonesia will further focus on the more sustainable economic development. The latest job creation law, what we call the Omnibus Law on Job Creation, was enacted on November 2nd, 2020. This is a direct response of our government to many concerns raised by private sector, national and from other countries on the uncertainties and high cost economy they have been facing for years in and with Indonesia. In a nutshell of Omnibus Law, focus of 9 broad area covering. The first one is improvement of investment ecosystem, simplification of business permit, and until establishment of a sovereign wealth fund, as well as the acceleration of strategic national project. In addition for these all things, Indonesia is also committed to a more sustainable and greener economy, as conveyed by our President, Bapak Joko Widodo, at the 20 Riyadh Leaders Summit on 29 November 2020. Indonesia government is set to transform the country's economy to offer greater environmental protection, incorporate green recovery, and other sustainable development options, while strengthening the domestic resource mobilization to support the recovery effort. Hearing the objective of our discussion today, of course, this is to answer the most important question: how can G20 make a difference this time for reviving world economy? The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the vulnerability of our today's system. Therefore, we need to ensure that our effort to recovery should lead a more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable world. This can be achieved through strengthening multilateralism, international solidarity, and global partnership. For Indonesia, there are 2 fundamental reasons to trust and to put hopes on the G20 leadership. The first one is G20 has a crucial role in setting the path for the future of the global economic recovery and growth because of its size and strategic importance. The second one, historically, we know all, the G20 has been proven as one of the most effective and quickest problem solver for global crisis. As we experienced in 1990, ASEAN financial crisis and 2008 global financial crisis. For overcoming the current crisis, recovering the global growth, G20 members are still the key player to lead the way. In the area of trade investment, let me tell that the work of G20 has led the leader to take several notable action on this important issue. To put world back on sustainable growth trajectory, first we might need to revisit 3 objectives of G20. The first one is coordinating policy among its members to achieve global economic stability and sustainable growth. The second one, promoting a financial regulation that reduce risk and prevent future financial crisis. And the third one, modernizing international financial architecture. Given the most relevant on the topic discussion and also the Sherpa track that we are involved, I would only like to give highlight on the policy coordination among its members as the step that need to be taken by the member. There are several aspects that I would like to highlight. First, G20 has to prove its ability to introduce a strongly recommended program to achieve an economic recovery from the current crisis and create a stable and fair global economy architecture by strengthening the existing international cooperation. Second, G20 will need to assure that the growth level of its member bring as well positive benefit for the member state. Third, G20 should improve its capacity along its element, including international organizations such as World Bank, IMF, OECD, and other think tank organizations in facing the crisis better. Fourth, talking about the institutional aspect of G20, we are fully aware that there are concerns being raised based on the G20 agenda itself that commonly duplicated any discussion in other fora. Lastly, G20 members need to really take the opportunity and utilize their strategic position and role. Despite the rising concern, Indonesia is quite optimistic that G20 will find its way and play the roles and will become stronger, faster, and better after a crisis. Indonesia welcomes very close cooperation with all G20 members, especially for Italy and India, to bring back the spirit of multilateralism and the relevance of G20 for a stronger and better global recovery. Thank you for your attention. I give it the floor to the Ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador.
Madam, thank you very much for a very succinct and very forward-looking message. I think it was wonderful to hear from you the latest assessment of the economic prospects of Indonesia. It is an important economy. It's also a very important player in Asian and world affairs. And as the forthcoming chair of G20, naturally, you will have a very important role to play. Your PowerPoint was extremely good, and I hope you will be sharing it with us, because those of us who want to have a closer look can do so. I was struck by your optimism about G20, because just the other day, some people were showing certain degree of coldness towards this organization, which has been reflected in my earlier remarks. I think it will be important for all of us to give due importance to what you said, and especially when you pointed out that the way out for G20 very much would be also to look at what they have to do to the non-members of G20. Thank you very much for your valuable contribution. May I now request the last panelist, but a very important panelist from the chair country, Italy, Mr. Marco Felisati, B20 Sherpa. He has dealt with international relations, trade, and trade-related matters for over 25 years. He is Deputy Director of Internationalization and Trade Policy at the Italian Federation of Industries. I presume this is the direct counterpart again to CII. As B7 and B20 Sherpa, he represents Confindustria in the Global Business Coalition, GBC. We are very honored to have you here, sir, and we request you to make a presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Bhatia, and good morning to everybody, friends and colleagues. I'm very happy to take part in this partnership summit, and I thank you very much for the kind invitation. I would like to start by underlining what Mr. Prabhu said in his intervention before on the word partnership. That I very much agree that word is key to identifying the task that we are confronted with. And in this sense, I think that our claim as B20 Italy 2021 is somehow very meaningful in this regard, as we are really committed to take the best out of the word partnership to face the unprecedented challenges that we're facing. Our claim resides reshape the future, include, share, act. And it shows the way of the long, challenging journey that is about to start with the inception meeting on January 21st and 22nd. Let me go back for a short while to when the Saudi cycle started. At that time, none of us could even barely expect what we would have gone through soon after. At that time, we could travel, we could meet, we could shake hands, could talk and spend some time together. Our company used to compete on the marketplace with a lot of constraints. Yes, Nicolas has remembered, and Stormy as well, trade wars were already ongoing, and the global economy was already under a relevant turmoil. But at least all in all, economic and productive activities were still relatively predictable. Of course, it wasn't business as usual, but we were somehow prepared to live with, at least for a short while more. At that time, our companies could sign contracts looking into each other's eyes, they could visit industrial plants, they could send engineers and technicians to assist their clients around the world. In a nutshell, for us, business, generating growth and jobs, yes, was difficult, but not so difficult as it is today. During this year, we have become accustomed to dramatic loss of human lives, to lockdowns, quarantines, sharp economic falls, unexpected companies' failures, unprecedented restrictions to mobility. In one word, we have become familiar to crisis in a year that nobody will ever forget. And I take this chance to thank once again our Saudi friends for the impressive results that they have delivered against such a disruptive scenario. They reacted sharply and proactively, especially in the early shocking phase of the pandemic. And I would say that they made it possible to turn an unprecedented sense of collective frustration into a vibrant and effective exercise. We are very grateful for that. But now allow me to switch toward what stands ahead of us, because we really have out there common challenges that we need to tackle together. As I said, we have become familiar to crisis, but we don't have a global crisis management scheme. And I think that we don't even have something that we may meaningfully call coordination. Differently from what happened on the aftermath of the last decade's economic and financial crisis, when actually the G20 saw the birth, that sense of urgency hasn't found yet the way to be conveyed into a pragmatic and effective coordinations among G20 countries. And we will try to underline these aspects because we are really committed to making 2021 remember for having started a widespread, worldwide social and economic and environmental regeneration. Because we think that we need it, and most of all, we deserve it. We are committed to do it all together. And the business community will do its best to show the way to politics. The role of the B20 is undoubtable. We have learned many lessons from previous B20 cycles. And we will operate in the line of consistencies and continuity with them while innovating our priority clusters to face the effect of the crisis. Let me say a few words on our governance, because if you really want to tackle hot and complicated and sensitive issues, you need to have an authoritative and long-sighted governance. The B20 Italy's task force chairs have been selected among the most prominent and experienced Italian CEOs. We have an advisory board composed by top-ranking Italian CEOs that will support Mrs. Marcegaglia, that is the B20 chair, in lining up with the G20 agenda You have mentioned the 3 Ps. I will come back shortly on this. And I take the chance to inform Mrs. Imbang that Mrs. Kamdani, the CEO of Synthesa Group from Indonesia, has been accepted to co-chair one of the most difficult and controversial, challenging task forces, trade and investment. And I have received their positive answer last night. Unfortunately, we don't have received many applications from Indonesia, but it was our care to have at least one prominent CEO in a leadership position to ensure a smooth handing over next year, eager to support you in the next presidencies. And we will also have an international advocacy caucus composed by top-ranking personalities that will support us to leverage our proposals to G20 governments and international organizations. The presidents of some of the most important business federations of the G20 countries have already confirmed their participation. Now, let me go very briefly to our priorities that I'm very happy to share with you. We have maintained nearly unchanged 6 task forces from the Saudi cycle, but we have added 2 new priority clusters. And the first is on health and life sciences. And in this task force, we will not simply address the issues that are strictly related to the pandemic, to vaccines, to medical devices, and to other relevant topics that come along with them. They will be, of course, in front line, but we will take on a widespread range of issues that range from medicines to lifestyle, from nutrition to well-being. Stormy Midler set this path 4 years ago at the B20 Germany in 2017. That is the only president of a health task force. I'm happy that we take it up again, although, of course, I regret the sad circumstances that have brought us to doing that. But I think that even without the pandemic, this issue is to be addressed, and I hope that Indonesia and India subsequently will maintain it. The second Italian signature that we will put in our B20 is an Action Council on Sustainability and Global Emergencies, that in which we will try to combine, to match the need to have strong and close coordinations at G20 level to cope with the number of possible systemic threats, with the imperative of finding sustainable long-term solution. We hope that nothing as terrific as this pandemic will hit our life again, but we also reckon that it can happen, and we must be prepared and equipped for that. Under this angle, sustainability will be kind of fil rouge across all task forces, and sustainability will be also the polar star of our B20. You've mentioned the 3 Ps of the G20 Italian, people, planet, prosperity. We will adopt a metric to measure our impact on the G20 agenda. And in doing that, we will track our policy actions, our policy recommendations against the United Nations SDGs and the 3 P. But we will not limit ourselves to see whether our policy recommendations fit into one or more SDGs or into one or more of the 3 Ps. We will try to make a step ahead and insert some quantitative elements to measure the expected impact of our recommendation. This is a very challenging task, and I hope we will be able to accomplish the way we have conceived it. A few words in the end on resilience. Both Nicolas and Stormy have underlined the many serious challenges of the trade and investments global framework. I will not elaborate any further because it is so well known that trade and investment are the real engine of growth, and every attempt to limit them is a vulnus to the daily life of every company. But trade wars, this loop of weak global governance, and I'm clearly referring to the WTO, of increased protectionism, of an enhanced national, let's say, misabuse of some security issues. And the pandemic has demonstrated altogether how fragile and fragmented is our governance. We will strive to make it stronger, to make it more resilient, to make it more inclusive. I will stop here because I don't want to take too much of your time. My stock taking is very fruitful. I have taken a lot of notes of your precious interventions, and I thank you once again together with friends from CII. And sorry, my video was not up. Okay, sorry. Apologize. I forgot to put my video. And I look forward to closely cooperate with you in the near future. And I thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Felicati. We did miss your face for a while, but your thoughts were so absorbing that they compensated for what we couldn't see. I think you have proved true to the notion that Italians are very practical people, and the takeaway from your intervention is very clear, which is really to stress the sense of urgency and ensure that there's coordination. And I think one more thing that struck me very clearly was your clear recognition that a presidency country's ideas have a good chance to last much beyond 1 year if the subsequent chairs get engaged and involved right in the beginning. And finally, this whole approach, which is metrics-oriented, quantification-focused approach, this is perhaps exactly what G20 needs today. Now, at this stage, I know that we have taken considerable time to run through the panel, and I want to just check quickly with Pranab if he would allow us 10 more minutes so that at least I could put one question to each of the panelists who have been very patiently participating in this. Pranab, is that okay?
Okay, sir, you can ask, but I believe Marco has to leave for some urgent meeting, so you can spare him kindly.
No. Thank you, sir. No. I will remain with you. I will remain with you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Mr. Marco then as the first question before he goes. He is an important person, so I can understand. I think the question that we have here for you is in terms of the focus of the Italian presidency with respect to the developing countries. We have heard before that G20 from time to time wakes up to do a few things for the developing countries and then perhaps goes back to its mode of focusing attention largely on the other parts of international economy. That is what the nature of the institution is. There was this stress on Africa during the German presidency. There was stress very much on DSSI because of the COVID last year or this year. What kind of thought processes there are in Italy today, in the presidency country, on the needs of the developing countries?
Thank you very much for your very interesting and meaningful questions. For the time being, I can only answer from the business perspective. And if you want me, I can elaborate a little bit on what we have in mind to address development and cooperation, because I would distinguish the two fields of actions as business. But I have also seen that the calendar of the G20 presidencies foresees a number of ministerial meetings that should be able to tackle some development-related issues. For example, if I remember correctly, there will be not a pure trade ministers meeting, but there will be a foreign affairs ministerial meeting, which in my view should encompass a wider range of issues. And if I simply match the motto of the 3 Ps all together, especially people, I would have no doubt that the development dimension will acquire a specific relevance in that framework. As long as business is concerned, you may have noticed, or those that have gone through our website, that we avoided to have cross-cutting issues, such as women in business or small and medium companies, not because we're not going to pay attention to that, but because we have adopted a vertical view. That is to say that each task force, no matter what they will be concentrating on, being energy and resource efficiencies, or integrity and compliance, or digital transformations, and so on and so forth, will have clearly before their eyes the metric that I have mentioned. So that grid, composed by SDGs/targets and the 3P, will be the overarching architecture that keeps our policy recommendations. So to answer your question, I would say that all our policy recommendations will be sustainable development oriented, not only one or few of them. Then you may have parts that are specifically dedicated. For example, in the Trade and Investment Task Force, we will have a chapter, that's a part dedicated to trade and development, as well as to trade and environment, or trade and competition. So our claim and our fil rouge will be all over our policy recommendations. And I'm very grateful for having raised this issue that I attach a lot of importance to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time you took out for us, and also the answer, very thoughtful answer you gave. My next question is to Madam Erlinda Imbang Jaya from Indonesia. Madam, Indonesia has been a very important player in the field of international trade. You played a big role in getting the RCEP signed after many, many years of negotiations. And as we all have heard, trade plays a very significant role in the agenda of G20. So the question for you really is to tell us a bit more as to how Indonesia plans to eventually, when its turn comes, but even now as the upcoming chair, and I think part of Troika, how it intends to advise Italy and the other members of G20 to try to promote international trade in the next 1 or 2 years?
Yeah, Mr. Ambassador, preparation for the upcoming chair, I think we have to talk further with the related institution internally. Regarding to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership or RCEP, Indonesia is actually for an open economy. Our president didn't categorically talk about liberalization, but rather about opening our economy in a fair and win-win manner. I believe that this is a key to understand where Indonesia is heading to. This explains also why Indonesia continue to negotiate the trade agreement with like-minded country, big and small, in our quest for a better position on the global trade map, a better place in the global value chain, of course, which is being confronted now by more centripetal forces and centrifugal ones. Is that the answer that I can inform to you? Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam. Thank you. The next question is for Madam Stormy Annika Milner. Madam, you recall at an intellectual interaction yesterday, you heard an expert on G20 say that one crisis, namely financial crisis of 2008-9, created G20, and another crisis, namely COVID crisis, killed it. This was a kind of a dramatic way to put across the infirmities and weaknesses of G20 today. A lot of us would not agree with that view, but that view exists. So given the fact that you are a veteran of so many G20 related activities, what is your objective assessment of the weaknesses and strengths of G20 today, and how you look at things happening the next 1 or 2 years?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think it's important to remember what the G20 is. It's not an international organization. It's not that rules and laws can be decided upon, which then everybody has to implement. One of the big strengths, at least in the past, maybe not so much in the last 3 years, but in the past, was that it's a forum to get the countries, the leaders of the G20 together, but also the policymakers below this through an organized process to build trust and understanding, to then agree on roadmaps, which then need to be implemented either through other international organizations or through the national legislatures. And so we should also not overburden the G20. It is a forum and not an international organization. Having said this, to fulfill its function as such a forum for trust building, understanding, exchange of views, the agreement on roadmaps, I really think that we need to revisit the structure of the G20. As I mentioned earlier, to allow for more cross-sectoral dealing with different topics. There are working groups on many issues, but you have the trade experts in the trade working group, you have the health experts in the health working group, you have the digital experts in the digital working groups, and they need to talk to each other a little bit more. And I also think that it would make a lot of sense to really have trust building exercises. I remember in the German G20 presidency, we had a pandemic preparedness exercise where the leaders really played through how to deal with a pandemic. And that is something which I think would be very, very helpful in the different streams and on the different levels of the G20 process. Overall, I think we need the G20 very clearly, because there's nothing else where such an exchange can take place. Although it's been extremely difficult, as I heard during the COVID crisis, to really have talks and negotiations and exchanges on a trustful way, so physical meetings are important. Nonetheless, it's really important, and I really don't know what could substitute for it. The G7 is important as well, but it doesn't include the big emerging economies, obviously. So to deal with the global challenges and the global crisis, we need the G20 as a lighthouse, which shines the light on the other global governance forum and is so to say the campus for where we want to go.
Thank you very much. So aptly put. We need G20 as a lighthouse to take us to our destinations. Thank you, Madam. My last question is to Mr. Nicolas Pino. Sir, you come from a country, France, which is in many ways central to the functioning of the international community. You come from OECD, which has had a terrific, not merely a window on G20, but a role in its evolution. So my question is, as we now are heading to the end of 2020 and we are seeing the emergence of new administration in the US, and we are hearing of the new platform coming up, D10, whether it'll be Democracy 10 or Digital 10, we would discover soon. Do you see D10's arrival as an opportunity or a cause for worry for G20?
Thank you, Chair. And let me first perhaps pick up on what Stormy Milner said, because I think this is very important. There is not so much the G20 can do, indeed. As Stormy, I think, eloquently put it, essentially the G20 is a forum, indeed. It puts the 20 heavyweights, economy heavyweights around the table, but it doesn't have a magic stick to fix global issues on which there is no consensus among those 20 members. The forum in itself can create a space to create a zone of comfort between those members. But at the end of the day, if there is no space for compromise between those 20 members, the G20 in itself can't do much about that. And you know, at the OECD, over the last 2 years, we did not manage to get a communique in our own ministerial meeting, what we call the Ministerial Council meeting of the OECD. We were not even able to agree on similar policy position around countries that are supposed to be like-minded. So you can imagine when you bring in the G20 countries which are so different, with different levels of development, with so divergent interests sometimes, as I said, there's not much the G20 can do about it. So now to respond very quickly to your question, I think the D10 is a good innovation, and it's not about competition between various fora. In fact, all those fora I think are complementary to each other. But it points to a more, I think, profound and structural trend in multilateralism. I think that more and more we will go to a sort of multilateralism à la carte, where we need to have, how can I say, alliance of countries that are willing, that are able to compromise on certain issues, that can forge consensus on certain issues. And by the way, that's also the beauty of the G20, that it's a flexible platform. The G7 has also become a flexible platform. At the last G7 summit, and that was the last summit in Biarritz in 2019, indeed, President Macron invited India, invited Australia, invited a few non-G7 members to the summit in Biarritz to precisely come up with certain decisions, for instance, in the digital space, on climate and other policy areas. This is the sort of viable geometry arrangements that can really yield results. And the G20, from that perspective, was also quite creative. It put in place, for instance, the Global Forum on Tax Transparency, which the membership of which extends much further than the G20 itself, and the outcomes in terms of fighting tax evasion have been really tangible in this global forum. Then it put in place the inclusive BEPS framework to tackle tax avoidance by multinational enterprises. And now it is negotiating on the taxation of the digital economy. And I'm sure that next year we will have good results. But this is this kind of multilateralism à la carte, as I said, that I'm sure is the future, the new frontier of the multilateral system.
Thank you very much. It's a very balanced summing up. If I may venture to say, I think I can only now address our large audience essentially to pinpoint one or two takeaways, important takeaways from our very distinguished panel. Clearly, we are living in unprecedented times. G20, in terms of its experts, business community, engagement groups, governments, have a clear idea of the diagnosis of the problem. It even has a clear glimpse of the pathway to get out of the crisis and head to the era of stability, security, and prosperity. This present game of blaming G20 will really not do, because it is the 101 of any institution that it is as important and as effective as its members will allow it to be. And therefore, clearly, the responsibility is on the political leadership in terms of creating trust and a sense of direction, and also, above all, consensus that enables G20 not merely to show the direction, but for leaders to make sure that their bureaucracies, their countries, their governments, and the other stakeholders in the countries actually adhere to what is agreed. If not, as very clearly was pointed out, there is going to be more and more issue-based alliances, and it is traveling on the back of issue-based alliances that the world may have to see partial, if not holistic, solutions of the various compartments of international economy. We know that it is a complex subject. It's difficult to simplify matters beyond this. I just want to thank our panelists who have, I think, honestly speaking, done a remarkable job of helping us to understand where G20 stands, what the challenges are, and what is it involving in terms of reviving the global economy. Let me thank you, all of you, once again, and I want to thank you, the leaders of CII, who conceived of this very special program, and we very much hope that not merely members of CII, but all the friends and past partners of CII around the world would have found this particular dialogue to be very fulfilling and very useful. Pranab, may I hand it over to you? Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So now we can close the session. So, of course, we have exceeded our time, but thank you very much for all the panelists who very patiently presented their thoughts and also this was very helpful, sir. Yeah.
Thank you and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.